3, 2, 1.
Here we go! Welcome to Mad Gains Live. Today we have a special treat. We're going to talk about fleet legalization and intrastate transportation and a little bit of interstate transportation and the difference between the two. This episode is for all three segments of my audience, brokers, carriers, and for shippers, because y'all need to know intrastate shipping. You need to know the intricacies. And today we're going to talk about that. We'll start with the basics and then we'll get more intense. I have a special guest for you guys. So happy Friday, buckle in and get ready. This episode is brought to you, and I'm so grateful for my sponsors that make this show happen. We have JJ Keller, who you will learn about in just a second because they are our knowledge and our substance today. And our other sponsor is the famous OTR Capital. There are factoring company, brokers, carriers. Go learn more at www.com, otrcapital.com/madgains. Check out my little landing page for OTR Capital. Y'all know I really like them. I have them often on my show because they're a good, solid factoring company. They don't play games. They support their carriers. They support their brokers. They know their business. No hidden fees or difficult termination. No fine print that you have to worry about. So check out that landing page. And while you're at it, you can check out my new website, which Lean Marketing developed for me, along with all these pretty logos. Lean Marketing has done this beautiful website, which is madgainslive.com. Okay, we are going to get started with a very interesting topic that we have never talked about on Mad Gains. So buckle in and let's introduce you to Rick, my favorite person for JJ Keller. Thank you for joining us today. I really, really appreciate you being here.
Oh, Cassandra, it's so great to be with you and the Mad Gains audience. This is a fascinating topic, right? And it's not one that gets a lot of airplay on your show or anywhere else for that matter. You know, folks, it seems would rather talk about hours of service or driver qualifications or, you know, drug and alcohol testing.
Yep.
But really, before you do any of that, you've got to make sure that you're structured correctly. You've got to know whether you're interstate, whether you're intrastate, whether you're for hire, whether you're a broker, whether you're a freight forwarder, and exactly what regulations you need to follow in each one of those categories.
Yeah, and it's actually, at first people are like, well, why wouldn't you know what the basics are, why your authorization, how you're legal? But I get the question a lot, and I get people who call me and they're like, hey, how do I do this? How do I get this authority? Or, hey, it says not authorized on Safer Watch, but I mean, I'm authorized. So
I'm a carrier. I've got a USDOT number. What do you mean I'm not
right
authorized?
Here. I got the number. So where do you? Oh wait, first I have a funny story for you, because we have a lot of people from Wisconsin that watch this show because I'm madly in love with Wisconsin people.
It is one of the finest states.
It really is, and I love the people, and I love Spotted Cow. It's my favorite beer ever. So when I worked for Schneider, I lived in your hometown, Appleton, for like 6 months. And you are a big kayaker, so you will appreciate this. I've never been kayaking ever. And my neighbors, they were so friendly. They're like, hey, why don't you go kayaking with us? And I told them I'm not the best swimmer, but I'll totally go with you guys. And they got me like a little life jacket and they put me in this kayak and I was like shaking because I was so scared. I was like, I hope I don't drown in this crazy thing. And so I'm like, all right, I'm in. I'm okay. And I'm like getting ready to take off from the dock and they're like, whoa, where are you going? You don't have your beer. And I was like, beer?
I like this sport.
I know. They started filling my kayak with beer. And it was like sinking down, so it's making me nervous, but I liked the addition of beer. And apparently they told me you get a lot of good exercise going up the river, and then you turn around and you float back down and you drink the beer the whole time.
Now, was that on Fox River that traveled right through Green Bay and Appleton?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a fun river.
I was like, this is Pretty brilliant. I love this kayaking business. So is that what you do when you go kayaking, or are you like a real kayaker? You don't need any beer. You go
Okay,
fast.
generally I do not have beer, but I am an open water kayaker primarily, and so I love Lake Michigan, Green Bay, Lake Superior, going from point A to point B, and have my claim to fame, if I have any at all outside of transportation, is that my sister, my wife, and I paddled from Green Bay, Wisconsin to Chicago, and did all of the coastline. And it was a great trip. We did it about 10, 15 miles at a
Wow.
time. But it was a fabulous trip, fabulous time. And my sister wrote a book about our travels. So
That is so
really fun
cool.
stuff. But what the beer did for you is it was ballast, which is a good defense for you, by the way. And so it lowered your center of gravity. Look, that's really probably why I needed it. Yeah,
I like that.
one, I could carry it, but also I'm a novice and it just makes my boat more stable.
I love that. I'm going to use that again. That's brilliant. Are you sure you didn't miss your call as a lawyer?
Well, I understand regulations, and so that much we have in common.
Oh, good. Perfect. So tell us a little bit about your role, and tell us about JJ Keller before we jump into being intrastate, interstate, fleet legalization, all that jazz.
Yeah, I am a transportation industry advisor. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, it means that I'm on the content team for JJ Keller. So if you get our manuals, if you get our newsletters, if you've attended our webcast, if you've seen any of our training programs, our content touches all of that. And since, as you mentioned, we both worked at Schneider National, that's my background. And that's where I learned transportation over a period of 13 years there, and then 8 years since then at JJ Keller. And so what we do on the content team is take the regulations and put them into plain English. And as reg nerds, as I like to call ourselves, we convert that then into trucking. And well, what does it mean to me? And so that's what we do a lot of at JJ Keller, for transportation, also for other regulatory agencies.
My entire career, I have every year, I have bought a green book from JJ Keller, my whole career. And it goes through the regulations, and it has like little guidance sections. And where is it actually? Is that it?
The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations green book. Know it well. That is
I
it.
have it.
Now of course, it's disappearing with your green
Yeah,
book.
I know. I'm like, my camera's like doesn't like it, but I have it, and it's also, you can't see, but it's like all beat up and done. But I'll tell anybody who's watching this and you want to really know about the safety regulations, and we'll put a link in the post. But this has been my baby, and I order a new one every year. You probably don't need to order. I don't know. Do you need to order a new one every year?
Here's the thing. So that book that you're holding in your hand, JJ Keller takes the federal regulations. We take the FMCSA's interpretations of the federal regulations. We take the DOT Drug and Alcohol Part 40, and we do a word for word publication of it. Now that one we put out every single quarter. And the driver one we put out every single month. And the reason that we do that, Cassandra, is that, well, what do regulators do for a living? They regulate. And so that means that they're changing all the time. Now, you don't have to get one every single quarter, but I would recommend getting a new one every single year. They're super inexpensive. And as you said, it's a great single source. I need to buy
a new one for this year. I love it. And for those of you who are just listening and you're not actually watching, it's just Safety Regulations Handbook. And the link you can find on jjkeller.com, because that's where I go for it. And the one I always buy is the Green Book Handbook. You can get a mini one, you can get a big one, but you can also get one on hazmat and a couple other things that I've bought in the past too. So sorry, I didn't mean to make this such go on and on about this book, but I just hit me when you said you were the editor that I've been using this my whole entire career, and I think anybody in the transportation industry should be using it as well. Let me put it back before I do this, making a bigger mess and start reading the book and then forget what we're doing.
It's just fascinating reading. It truly is.
It really is. So where do you think we should start, Rick? Where's the best place to begin this discussion?
Well, if we talk all things, fleet legalization, we should probably start at the beginning, and that is what is the difference between interstate and intrastate? It's a question that we get all the time because folks say, well, wait a minute, I never leave my state. I pick up at the rail terminal or at the at the shipyard, and I just bring it to my customers all within my city. What do you mean that I'm interstate and I have to follow the interstate rules? Well, I mean that you're interstate and you need to follow the interstate rules, because it doesn't just matter if the vehicle or if the driver crosses a state line or crosses a national boundary. It's also what's in the vehicle. If the what's in the vehicle started its journey outside of the state and is bound for inside the state, or vice versa, started its journey inside the state and is bound for outside of the state, well, that's an interstate movement, and you need to follow the interstate rules. That goes for the first and last mile deliveries as well as the cross-country drivers. And then intrastate, I just love the FMCSA's definition of intrastate. If you're a reg nerd and you want to find out where that is, it's in 390.5. And the definition for intrastate is not interstate. So
yeah, you know what? That was pretty smart. Save
right. It does make it pretty simple.
So, but in reality, if I'm a trucking company and I don't cross state lines, I only just drive around in Illinois and that's it. Don't go across the state lines. I'm okay just getting not inter, but intrastate authority. Is that right?
Yes, you can. If you never engage in interstate commerce, you don't have to have, interstate US DOT number, or for hire carriers or brokers, freight forwarders don't need interstate for hire authority. They can just go with the intrastate authority. But here's the downside of that thought process. I look at having an interstate US DOT number. It's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. For instance, I often get the question of, hey, we're buying this new piece of equipment. It's just across the state line. What type of permits do I need to go pick up that equipment? It's like, you're registered as an intrastate carrier. You cannot go pick up that equipment, because that would be engaging in interstate commerce to bring back that vehicle. And so you can either hire a driveway towaway operation to bring you the vehicle, or you can get interstate authority and go get it yourself.
First of all, when I go to get intrastate, do I go to the state for my authority, or do I still go to the US DOT and get my authority for just within the state?
Really simple question, Cassandra. So I wish I had a really simple answer. So you have to start out with, does that state require a US DOT number? And about 36 states do require a US DOT number for their intrastate operators. And so you have to go to the FMCSA. If you're a brand new carrier, you go online to the URS site and you fill out what's known as the MCSA-1 form to get your US DOT number. Now, when you do that, you just check intrastate instead of interstate, and they will issue you the intrastate US DOT number. From that point, you're regulated by the state that you're operating in, so you have to follow their rules. The problem with that is which rules do you follow?
Yeah. And
the state rules can vary from the federal rules in several respects. So the federal rules, of course, as most folks know, apply to vehicles that are 10,001 pounds or over. The passenger vehicles that are designed to carry more than 9 passengers for compensation, or 9 or more or 16 or more, regardless of compensation. And then anytime you have hazardous material on board. Well, for the state rules, usually anytime you need a CDL, the rules will apply. But for those medium weight vehicles between 10,001 and 26,000 pounds, the state really has the ability to decide which rules they want to impose. Most states will pick a weight class and just go with it. But some states, like Wisconsin, may have 3 different weight classes. Some rules kick in at 10,001, some kick in at 17,000, and still others kick in at 26,001. So even though this is simple, I only need to know one state's rules, you still have to know which rules to follow. And certainly we at JJ Keller track all of that for our customers at the state level from state to state.
Just I want to dive into that a little bit further, but just to take a step back, I remember you saying that it's better to just get the interstate authority versus intrastate authority, which totally made sense. But is there a reason why some folks just don't get their interstate? Like, is insurance more expensive once you get that interstate versus
it can be more expensive because once you have that interstate authority, by definition, you can go anywhere. And then if you're for hire, they don't really have any additional safety regulations, but you do need to designate process agents, and you do need to ensure that you have the right amount of insurance in place. Of course, most states have insurance requirements as well. Now, one other thing about intrastate operations is that many states do require the intrastate carriers to register with the states as well. So even if you have an intrastate US DOT number, you may need to go to the Public Utilities Commission or another regulatory agency within the state to get the state authority. And what's interesting about state authority is, for hire authority at the federal level is only, of course, for hire carriers, but at the state level, oftentimes it even applies to private carriers. So that's something to keep in mind.
That's good to know. Do brokers need to get any state authority, or are they okay just getting federal authority?
Well, again,
if you don't know the answer.
Yeah, brokers really have the greatest flexibility if they have their broker authority through the FMCSA and its interstate base, right? It just allows them to have a full portfolio for their customers.
Yep, that makes sense. So now going into we follow the state rules. If we have intra-state authority, it could depend on how much your truck weighs and obviously what state you're based in. And you're going to stay in that state driving around because you've got intra-state authority. Most people who are watching are going to be in Illinois, Texas, or Georgia. I've noticed it. And Georgia and California switch when I run reports on my show. Which state is like the most regulated for intrastate carriers?
You just hit the top 3. California, Texas, and Illinois are very protective to make sure that their in-state carriers are registering with them and paying all the appropriate fees, and their vehicles are marked correctly. There's other states that, especially for interstate carriers that are operating and doing an intrastate move. Think of it as, the cabotage rules with Canada, right? You can go into Canada, but once you're there, you can't do a movement from Quebec to Montreal because that's you're staying in the provinces. You can get a load back to the states, and same thing for Canadian carriers that are coming into the U.S. The cabotage rules say, okay, but now you can't do movements within the U.S. unless it's to get you closer to back home. You have to find freight that is going to be taking you back home. Well, for interstate carriers, it's very similar when they go within a state. Again, Texas, Illinois, California are really strict on this, and others as well. If you're doing a point A to point B movement in their state, you better be registered with the state in order to do that movement. So, for instance, in California, you need a CA number and an MCP number in order to engage in that intrastate movement.
Ooh. So what if I'm not based in California? I'm based in Arizona, but I still do that. I do like, I don't know, LA to San Francisco.
Yep. So if you're doing an LA to San Francisco move, you need to be registered with California in order to do that.
I hope people are listening to that. Now, that I'm imagining is complicated when it comes to shippers and brokers. When they hire a carrier that's based in Arizona, doesn't have authority in California, and they're doing an intrastate California shipment. That's, I mean, the shipper and the broker, I don't imagine would get in trouble, but in order to avoid having issues along the road,
it's part of the vetting process to make sure that carrier is set up in those states, that you have that intrastate move that you want covered.
I love that. So before we dive further into the trucking side of this whole thing, what do you recommend to shippers and brokers that are watching and they're like, all right, I'm now learning about intrastate authority. And now I'm thinking, because, I want to open up capacity. And so I do want to hire more intrastate carriers for shipments that we have within that state. How can I verify that they're following that state law, like Texas, Illinois, and California?
Well, most states will issue the carrier a separate number. Again, for California, it'd be the CA number. Texas is very much the same through the DMV. And so, if they're, first of all, the shippers and the brokers would need to know what states require authority. Many do, particularly for hire, and that's really what we're talking about here. If you're a broker and you're reselling demand, by definition, it's going to be for hire. And so you need to make sure that in that state, they have that for hire authority. And of course, the verification or the vetting process for that is going to vary by state to state on what authority in which state.
I know that in California, I've tried to look up when I was vetting intrastate for California, there is a way online that you can look up and verify the carrier's authority. And then I still verified the insurance. I think that was like the best I could do, because I don't think any of these states have like SMS data, like the federal level, they have data. But what do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of information on that. But again, most of the states do require a registration of some sort, and so you can verify that information with your carrier to make sure that they have those credentials.
This is so interesting. What states...
I told you it'd be fascinating.
It is, because no one talks about this. It's actually, and I would encourage leaders to make sure that they're listening to this as well, so that when their sales folks or their shippers come to them looking to be experts on this information, they've got it. And when you are a trucking company and you want to be aware of how you can get yourself in trouble, this is a great one to know about. I had the best question on the tip of my tongue. What states do not? It's okay if you don't know this answer, because it's like a pop. I feel bad, Rick. It's like a pop quiz for you right now.
There's only 50 states, right?
What states do not have really any requirements for truckers, or the lightest amount of requirements?
That I don't know. I don't really track the lightest, because they just don't hit my radar that often. It's
because some people are like, which state should I be registered in, so I can avoid any regulation, period?
Exactly right. The questions that come into me oftentimes regarding these registration and authority questions for intrastate normally start out with, I was in, name the state, and I got the citation because is that legitimate? And then I go look it up and say, yep, it sure it is. If you were doing an intrastate move in that state, you need to have the authority. I do know that my home state for instance, requires for hire carriers to have intrastate authority, but I don't believe, and I shouldn't say this, I don't want to get any carriers in trouble or any brokers in trouble, but they're not as strict, let's just put it that way, as some of the other states when it comes to enforcement.
Okay, that makes sense. And you do remind me that for everybody out there, we're not, Rick and I are not giving legal advice or professional advice. This is education only.
Right.
So you should definitely, whatever state you're operating in, you should definitely hire an attorney, or JJ Keller, hire them formally to get more details about your particular state. Rick and I are just trying to help folks and lead them down the right direction.
Yeah, and by the way, we do track the authorities that are required for every state. I just don't have it at the tip.
You just don't have it on the tip of your, you don't want it out.
It's the Einstein methodology, right? Why remember things you can look up?
I know. I wouldn't either. I have no idea what the answer was to my question. I was just curious if it was something that would pop up at the top of your head. So let me flip my page because I'm like taking notes because I love this so much. So we have so far talked about the difference between intrastate and interstate. Then, a lot of your advice around maybe you should just go ahead and get the interstate authority as well. It's worth the extra effort. And especially when your sales folks are selling lots of shipments for your trucking company. We hit on following different state rules. If you are just intrastate, or actually could be you've got to follow the rules within your state. They could be based on weight class. That's kind of cool. And then if you are a carrier and you are based in Arizona and you're moving in another state like California from San Francisco to LA, that's an intrastate move. And if you are not regulated among that state, you could get yourself in a bind, for example. And so where do we go from here? What are the most common questions on this topic that people are coming to you about besides what we just reviewed? We did a lot of good stuff.
Well, it really goes then into kind of the next phase of, okay, I know that I'm going to be interstate, or I know that I'm going to be intrastate. Do I need for hire authority, and exactly what is for hire, and exactly what is a private carrier. And again, most folks think that they know, right? It's like, hey, look, I'm as far as I know, I'm not going out and buying any freight, and so I must be private, right? But then you'll have these companies that may have a parent company, and they may have 4 or 5 subsidiaries. And the question that I get is, well, can't all of my trucks just operate underneath the parent company's USDOT number? And no, they can't. A USDOT number is unique to an individual entity, and an entity, from the IRS's perspective, and thereby the FMCSA's perspective, is, do they have a unique FEIN number? If they do, they're an individual. And if they operate commercial motor vehicles, or if they are in the brokerage business or freight forwarder business, they have to have their own credentials. And so that parent company, all their subsidiaries cannot just run underneath their USDOT numbers. Every single one of the entities need to have their own USDOT number. But one way they could structure that, if they're all individually private otherwise, but hey, look, our trucks are always going to the same cities, the same locations within those cities, and we have a parent company, if we have 4 subsidiaries, it really doesn't make sense to send 5 trucks. No, it doesn't. So you can choose one of either the parent company or the subsidiary. They can get for hire authority. And then the subsidiaries, for instance, and the parent company can hire their other affiliated company to do all their transportation, just like they would for any other for hire carrier. And that way you're dotting the I's, you're crossing the T's, you're you're keeping it all in the house, right?
Right.
The revenue may be moving from the right pocket to the left pocket, but it's still staying in house.
Ooh, I hope shippers paid attention to that, because a big furniture company in Wisconsin could be a big shipper and have their own trucks and moving their furniture around, and that would apply to that company and other companies that I'm thinking about, because it is interesting to see what folks do with their private fleet, especially shippers, and what can be done as well. So that's really smart,
right? And of course, it's not uncommon for an otherwise private carrier to go ahead and get their for-hire authority. And that just increases their revenue possibilities rather than coming back empty on the backhaul. They might as well get some revenue to the truck coming back. Work with a broker and find some freight that's moving them from where they delivered back to their home base, and get some extra revenue on the truck. And it can also help balance out capacity and demand flows, right? Because if you're a private carrier, you know that the same amount is not going out and coming in, month in, month out. Well, if I have authority on my slow months, I can go ahead and, sell my extra demand to extra carriers rather than laying off the drivers. It can be revenue producing.
That's pretty smart, especially in a time like now where capacity is needed everywhere. Okay, I'm jumping around a little bit on you. I just want to ask you one more question, and it's very basic, but interesting nevertheless. As a intrastate carrier, is it the same? Let me think about how I'm going to ask this question. How does a state usually regulate if you're in compliance? Can any officer pull you over and know all the rules and everything? I know it's a crazy question, but I was just imagining how the states enforce this.
Sure. So, of course, most scale houses, most inspection locations are not staffed by, federal agents. Most scale houses, most inspection locations are staffed by the state authority, whether that's the state patrol or some other, enforcement agency within the state. And so the FMCSA relies on their state partners to enforce the federal rules. But if they have an intrastate vehicle in front of them, those officers would know those rules as well. And, as far as the roadside inspections go, for those states that have the US DOT numbers or require the US DOT numbers, those inspections, would show up in SMS for those carriers, because that's how the state is tracking the information. Although they would not have to be worried about the FMCSA coming in doing a compliance review, but
that was my next question.
Right? But they
still that US DOT number. So then I was like, we got that DOT number.
Right? Are we going to be in trouble? Right.
Right.
And if they are using the scenario before where I said, well, it may make some sense to go ahead and get an interstate US DOT number, that may be one of the offsetting considerations that you bring into play.
Right.
Well, now, even though 99.5% of what I do is intrastate, the FMCSA, I'm still going to be on their radar because I have an interstate US DOT number. So that is a watch out. But if you're minding your P's and Q's as it were,
the rules,
and whether you're regulated and whether the enforcement falls, within the state or whether it falls under the federal purview, if you're not a safe operator, you're going to be raising red flags one way or the other and coming to the attention of the regulators.
Okay. Oh my God, that was exactly the direction I was going. I was trying to imagine. I know in my mind sometimes I forget and I keep thinking, these highways are federal, so maybe it's just federal agents enforcing these rules for the FMCSA, and then I forget about the state police, and then there's this mix of all that, and so this is helpful to hear how that is, because I was thinking, well, maybe there's really nobody enforcing these rules from the state,
right?
So you can just keep passing those weight stations and don't worry about it. No need for inspections and da da da.
And that's the other question that I get in that space of, well, if I'm intrastate, do I have to pull
Yep.
into that scale? Am I subject to inspections? Well, what if I'm interstate, but I'm operating a 17,000 pound vehicle, maybe a straight truck? I certainly don't have to stop, do I? Well, likely you do. Now, again, it's a state by state consideration, and in some states, even from scale house to scale house, the expectation of what vehicles pull in may vary a little bit. But I always suggest by going by the signs. If the sign says all commercial vehicles, if the sign says all trucks, pull in. It's far better to be green lit through or to be waved through than it is to be chased down. So
ooh, yeah,
whether you're intrastate, whether you're a medium weight vehicle, pull in, because if you get the green light, you don't really lose any time anyway. If they chase you down, the inspection is not going to be a friendly inspection. You're going to be starting out with a violation.
That sucks. One more question. I lied to you. You brought up a very large growing industry that's popular and has been for a while, which is e-commerce and the final mile. Is there anything that in general you want folks who have divisions with box trucks and final mile, is there anything they need to know? Because how much do those trucks weigh? Aren't they like smaller, so they weigh less?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, Cassandra. So again, if the vehicle's rated over 10,000 pounds, likely it's going to be regulated, because likely if you're doing those final mile deliveries, it's going to be interstate commerce, even though you never leave a small geographic area. So over 10,001 pounds, you're going to be regulated. Under 10,001 pounds. Technically, and I say technically because I don't know how strongly it is enforced, but the for-hire authority is an old holdover from the Interstate Commerce Commission that the FMCSA inherited. And so for-hire authority is required at any weight class, including under 10,000 pounds. And so you may not have a USDOT number, but you may very well have a MC number designating that for-hire authority.
Interesting. So if I'm just gonna buy some box trucks, I'm gonna run final mile for Bed Bath & Beyond, and I'm in Illinois, I'm just gonna, just get going. If obviously this answer is based on state law, so it's your probably advice is going to be given in general sense. You would recommend that I still get that MC number and that DOT authority number? Is that the best thing for me to get with my box trucks?
If you want to stay flexible and you want to keep your options open, that's what I recommend. If you go with just intrastate and you're never going to go over 10,001 pounds, well, fine. Stay with the state rules. There's no problem at all. Just understand. Now you use the phrase box truck, so just understand you're kind of boxing yourself in as far as the flexibility goes. So as long as you understand the limitations, that's perfectly acceptable. You understand. You made a decision. Go with it.
I love it. Okay, I'm gonna wrap this episode up. Here's what I would like to ask of you. Please come on the show again. I feel like we have a new friendship going here, sure. And you are going to be a wealth of knowledge for us for topics that we haven't been talking about and topics that we have been talking about, because you have so much experience. So we have now, it's Rick Malchow. I said that right?
Well, you're from Wisconsin. You should know that there's a couple of ways to pronounce my name. One is perfectly acceptable, Malchow. That's what they use up in the Green Bay area. In the area that I'm in the Appleton area, they say Malchow.
Ooh, fancy.
What's interesting is
cool.
both sides of the family insist that great grandpa said it the way that they pronounce it, of course. And that's because it's a German name. And of course, Germans kind of have that throaty pronunciation. And so it's kind of a blend between the two, but I go by Malchow.
Okay, Malchow. Ooh, that sounds good. You did a blend of two. So Rick Malchow. For those of you who are just listening and you're like, who is this guy? I want to learn more about him. He is also on LinkedIn. You can type in Rick and then Malchow, and you can reach out to him and say, I heard you. Please teach me more. JJ Keller is awesome. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to our sponsors, JJ Keller, of course, and OTR Capital. And we will see you guys next episode.